And broadcast.
Looks better off, right?
Say this every week. No, it's better on.
I don't remember from one week to the next, so.
Okay, we're gonna get started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Jessica, I'm one of the owners of the store, and we're excited to welcome you to our event series, Squawkin Sports, hosted by Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. For this installment, they're gonna be chatting with Michael Stahl about his new co-authored book, Big Sexy, in his own words. So you're in for an excellent time tonight. Before we start, I just want to say a big thanks to everybody for making this happen, to Patrick and David and Michael for being here, and to all of you guys for showing up. Greenlight storefronts are currently closed, but our community is still here, and we're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversations like this. A couple little housekeeping things. Because this is a webinar, as you're joining, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see and hear you. They can see your name, so they know you're here. And you can interact via the chat. Feel free to use the chat for any thoughts you have, just to be like, hey, I'm here, or here's what I think about that. If you have a specific question you'd like to ask the author, we want you to use the Q&A for that, just so that Patrick and David can pull out some questions for Michael a little later in the event. We'll put a reminder about that in the chat too. We are recording tonight's event, so look for audio or video versions on our website and social media channels later on. And very importantly, tonight's featured book, Big Sexy, is available for sale from greenlightbookstore.com. So though our stores are closed, we're working with our supplier warehouse for fast direct-to-home shipping. So if you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. And as a special treat, we're offering 15% off on Big Sexy when you order it from Greenlight's website this week. I'm gonna be pasting that buy link and the coupon code in the chat shortly. So let me introduce everybody. Our hosts for this evening are Patrick Sauer and David J. Roth. Patrick has written for many large publications you've heard of and even more small ones that no longer exist. He's a founding member of the Billings, Montana to Brooklyn sports writing pipeline and happens to be my neighbor. So hi, Patrick. David is a former editor at Deadspin. He previously worked at Vice Sports and his writing has appeared in the New Republic, New York, Food and Wine, Hazlitt, the New York Daily News, and the New Yorker. He is not the David Roth from Van Halen or Magic. So very important.
Yeah, thank you.
He'll be speaking tonight with featured author Michael Stahl. He's written for the likes of Rolling Stone, Vice, Vulture, City Lab, The Village Voice, Huffington Post, Quartz, Outside Magazine, many more. And he's covered the arts and culture, sports, psychology, history, politics, health, relationships, business, real estate, and even more topics. His new book, co-written with the one and only Bartolo Colón, is a touching and deeply personal story about baseball's most colorful player, told more or less in his own words. So Michael's going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then he's going to be talking with Patrick and David and taking questions from all of you. So please take it away, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to read a little bit from the prologue, just the very opening of the book, obviously. I'm sitting on the roof of my Hummer, my legs dangling through the skylight into the back seat. The car is slowly winding downhill on the main road of the place where I grew up, El Copay, part of Altamira, a town in the northernmost province of the Dominican Republic. Lining the sidewalks on either side of me are the short, colorful buildings I've seen here since I was a little boy. Straight ahead of me in the distance is one of the area's many large mountains. They say that when Christopher Columbus showed up, he saw the landscape and said, "Look at the heights." That's about what Altamira translates to in English. I'm not alone on this road. I'm completely surrounded by people. I can't count how many. It seems like everyone from Altamira and plenty more from other places, north and south, like Puerto Plata and Navarrete, is out here celebrating with me. I was just named the Cy Young Award winner as the best pitcher in the American League for the 2005 season. As the car moves forward, people jump up to shake my hand and give me high fives. I know and love many of them. The rest know me and love me too, I guess. The reason they love me today is that I bought cases and cases of beer and put each bottle up for sale at just 1 Dominican peso, or about 33 American cents. In my hands is a bottle of rum. Soon it will be replaced by a sparkling cider. At the outdoor community recreation area where the parade started, there's a big sound system that I had set up, blasting music, and there's tons of food, mounds of rice and beans and roasted chicken and pork, everything. Riding below me is my wife, and in a few cars behind me are my parents, my brother, and 5 sisters, and my 3 sons. My 4th will arrive in 3 years. This parade is only about the midway point of the celebration. 3 days ago, I was at the nearby field I had built, which would become the center of the Bartolo Colón Baseball Academy, where teenage boys train to become Major League Baseball players like me. A representative of mine in the United States called me while I was at the field. He said I needed to be ready for a phone call from Major League Baseball's main office. Many of my best friends were with me, and there was a lot of noise, so I locked myself into a car where it was quiet. They all followed me and stood around the car. The phone rang, and the voice on the other line said, "Mr. Colón, congratulations, you've won the Cy Young Award." I was overcome with emotion, and I could not speak. My friends were tapping on the window saying, "Bartolo, what is it? Bartolo, what did they say?" The only thing I could do was smile and give them a thumbs up. When I did that, they screamed. They knew what it meant. That was when the party began. Word spread through the town, and people started coming together. I went to the farm where my mother and father lived to tell them the news. Of course, my mom and dad were always very supportive of me, and they cried from the excitement. I was again speechless. My father told me to jump up and down 3 times to snap myself out of it. I always listened to my father, well, almost always. So that's what I did, and it worked. Later, when I received my Cy Young Award plaque, I gave it to him and my mother. After talking to them, I went for a stroll to my friend Mino's house. I needed a quiet place again for another phone call, a conference call with reporters from the US. When that was over, I finally went into town for some fun. In the days leading up to my trip down the 3-kilometer parade route through Altamira, the party continued, as it did for a few days afterward. In the years since, while I continued my career, and after I threw my last pitch in the majors on September 22nd, 2018, there would be many more parties in Altamira and elsewhere, celebrating me and my career. My life hasn't always been one big party, though. Before I became a professional baseball player, there were a lot of hardships, no different than those of many people in the Dominican Republic and around the world. And during my time as a pitcher, I experienced many struggles and tragedies, some no different than those of others, some very unique and at times impossible to comprehend. But it all began fittingly in a land of steep valleys and incredible peaks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Jump up and down 3 times.
Yeah, right?
I'm going to work that in as a parenting tool.
It worked for him or his dad, I guess.
I think we have to start with the most basic of questions. How did you, lifetime Mets fan, get the gig to write the Bartolo Colón book?
To be honest with you, it is the classic story of I knew a guy. So when I first started writing in 2012, after an 11-year career as a high school English teacher, I was looking for places to get published, and the first place that would publish me was this website called Narratively, which I still do a lot of work for. And back then, Narratively was also just starting out. So they had these open editorial meetings where if you just were a writer of any merit, you can go and pitch stories directly to the editors. So what I did was I made sure that I went to every single one of these meetings, and I made sure I had stories to pitch that quite often they wound up taking. At one of these meetings was a guy named Garrett McGrath, and Garrett had done some writing for the site. And I guess, we just kind of hit it off. We bonded over New York sports, and over the years, he sort of elevated through the publishing world and became an editor at Abrams Books. And we, continue to stay friends, go to Islanders games together. He was in my fantasy baseball league a couple of years as well. And in November, or rather September, just after Labor Day, September 2018, he just pretty much called me out of the blue, and he said, "Mike, we have a book that we're putting together, and I think you'll be a good writer for it." That's all he said to me, and I said, "I'm your guy." And he said, "Well, it's Bartolo Colón's autobiography," and I said, "Well, I'm your guy." And he said, well, we'll try and get you down to Texas. Maybe you can meet him sometime this month. I go, yeah, I'm your guy. And he goes, maybe we'll pay you like about X amount and we'll fly you down to the Dominican Republic. You can go see where he grew up and interview him down there too. I said, yeah, I'm your guy. And then he said like one or two other details. And I was like, look, I don't know how many times I have to say I'm your guy, but I'm your guy. And really, if Garrett was calling me like that, and if Garrett thought that I was going to be right for the project, then I knew I would be right for it too. So, I think he had seen my writing, progress over the years that we knew each other. And, he knew that this was a project that I would deliver on, because he'd been in a position to give me jobs before, I guess. And he chose this one. So, they approached me, which makes things a lot easier, because normally the way it would work for a writer is you would have a book proposal and you'd have to do all kinds of research and put it all together and try and sell that to an agent, and then have an agent sell that to a publisher. But they came to me with this project, and it was just an incredible experience. My first book, I'll never forget it.
And did you and Bart hit it off? Was there first of all, how much Spanish do you speak versus how much English does he speak? And did you guys, what was the feeling out process like of that like?
He's much better at English than I am at Spanish, which is saying something. But although he is actually better of an English speaker than people realize. But, for those people that aren't completely familiar with his career, Bartolo notoriously always did his post-game interviews through a Spanish interpreter. And we actually went through the process of our conversations where we had an interpreter as well. He still wanted to speak through Spanish. He's just more comfortable with that. Frankly, it probably would have been smarter for Abrams to get a bilingual writer, but maybe I brought certain elements to the table that someone else might not have been able to. But yeah, so the first day I finally met him was in May of last year, 2019, and going into it, I knew that I really wanted Bartolo to take me seriously. And I knew that if I went in there just as this like deer in headlights, lifelong Mets fan, and just was like, oh, tell me about the home run, I felt like that would just be like really kind of corny. So what I did was I did a deep dive into his career, really went through his baseball reference very closely. And I realized that he pitched in the 1998 American League Championship Series for the Indians against the New York Yankees. And now I hadn't recalled that he pitched that game, but I do remember that game put the Indians up 2-1 against the Yankees.
Right.
And that Yankees team was the best baseball team I've ever seen. And being a lifelong New Yorker, I just remember Yankees fans kind of like, soiling themselves, thinking like that they were going to lose to the Indians. Pretty much because no, they did not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spoiler. It's not, but let people figure it out.
Yeah. Right. No, they wound up going on to win the next 3 consecutive games and taking that series. As a matter of fact, Bartolo shut them down in Game 3, a 1-run complete game victory for him. And if that series went to a Game 7, Bartolo would have pitched again.
Oh, I didn't know that. I saw that in the book. That would have been unbelievable.
Yeah. So anyway, so what I did was I when I was going through his baseball reference, I saw that box score and I was like, oh my God. I was like, he was the one that shut down this incredible team. And I was like, what if I go in and, ask him about that? And, it's got to be like a big memory that maybe, your ordinary Mets fan or Bartolo fan would have thought of. So I went to his house and it was a pretty surreal moment, meeting him, as you might imagine. And one of my first thoughts, I think, was, wow, you're not nearly as fat as I would have thought.
You're not fat enough. You should be fatter. This is a disappointment.
Right. Look, if your nickname is Big Sexy, I mean, come on. But but I didn't lead with this, but I did say it to him at some point later. You're not nearly as big as I thought. And he goes, people tell me that all the time. But, so I met him and we just were kind of hanging out in his living room for a few minutes. Garrett was with me, Garrett from Abrams Books. And he was very quiet, very shy, as you might expect. And even, at one point when it seemed like we were going to get close to starting the interview and the interpreter was there, I said to Bartolo, I said, is there anything you want to know about me? And he just looked at me and goes, no. And I said, all right, fair enough. So we just went down into his basement and where he has this kind of man cave. And I just said to him, Bartolo, the first thing I got to ask you was, you pitched, I'm a Mets fan, but you pitched against that Yankees team in '98. What was that like? And, we talked about it for about 10 minutes and he told me some things that, they're in the book. And at the end of it, he said, I have video of that ninth inning from that game on my phone. So as soon as he said that, I was like, I am in.
Nice.
Because obviously it must be a huge memory for him if he's got that, footage on his phone. And then he showed it to me. It was great.
I've never been able to say this in a way that seemed responsible, but I myself have also spent some time on Bartolo Colón's baseball reference page recently. I'm on deadline too, but it was the sort of thing where you want to prepare for an interview and then
research.
Suddenly you're like, oh wow, Enrique Wilson, I remember him. What an interesting career. But that 98 team, that 98 Indians team was extremely good. I will treat listeners to just some of the names of some of the guys that were on that team to sort of contextualize it. So teammates that Bartolo Colón had on that team, Jim Thome, David Bell, who was still a second baseman at that point, Omar Vizquel, Travis Fryman, Kenny Lofton, Mark Whitten, Dwight Gooden. Both Joey
I forgot
Cora,
Doc did some Indians time.
Dave Burba. So this is basically a team that, whatever, I was in college when they were still a going concern as that roster. But that is fully a generation ago. That is an era of baseball where the guys that are on that team, Jim Thome, whatever, the guys that have made the Hall of Fame are going to make the Hall of Fame. There's a bunch of, guys that were sort of backups on that team that have since had and lost Major League Baseball managerial jobs. The span of his career, because he is still technically active. I mean, he's training and apparently wants to come back. He's 47 years old, but
did he play with Jim Cott? Did he actually? Did they actually cross over?
It's so close. You could basically connect it back linearly to Ty Cobb. If he had started a couple of years earlier.
Yeah, it's only 3 degrees of separation from him and Ty Cobb or something like that.
But that sweep of his career as a writer, how do you try to get a story that is it's 20 odd years of Major League Baseball, but I mean a long life. Where do you just sort of let him dictate what he wants to talk about? Or I mean, how do you get all of that into a book that is of an edible size?
I think what I did was, like I said, I took such a deep dive into his career and did my research. And I'll be honest, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant. I really don't mean it to, but I think my sort of storytelling instincts just kind of kicked in. I honestly don't feel that I'm necessarily an incredibly talented writer, but I do feel like I know how to construct a story pretty well. And I think that comes across in this book. So, it really just was, certainly with his personal life, I didn't know quite as much as I knew about his professional career. So I think with that, it was more just, me asking him questions. And, I'm such a fan of not even just him, but just of baseball and baseball players as a whole. So for instance, in my case, I would say I really wanted to hear what it's like for a guy like him in the minor leagues, thinking coming over from the DR, not really speaking English at all at that time. And, trying to get by, in these sort of leagues, in kind of the middle of nowhere, relatively speaking, to places like New York City, where he played for 4 years total. So I really just asked him to kind of play the hits for me, I guess, in terms of his professional career. And then asked him just some questions about his family and just kind of let him go. And like I said, I think that's why I knew going into that first meeting with him that starting with that Yankee story was going to be huge because, he's a very shy guy. He is in real life and he comes across that way. He has come across that way throughout his time in the big leagues. So I knew I was going to need to get him to open up. And I really did. And I'm proud of that. As a matter of fact, I think it was after the second day that I went. So I went 4 days in a row to his house in New Jersey. And then about a week and a half later, I traveled down to the Dominican Republic and I was around him for a couple of days down there as well. But I think it was the second day I was in his house in New Jersey. After I left, I talked to his interpreter and I called him. I just said, "Hey, how's it going? Like, is this going? I feel like it's going well. Can you give me a sense of how this is going for him?" He says, "Oh, this is great. He actually pulled me aside after you left. He said, I like Mike. I like him asking me these questions. This is a lot of fun." So I was like, "Oh, great." That was, especially early on in the process, I was like, that's all I needed to hear. So I just kind of trusted that to some degree, my fandom was going to come out and dictate, the stories that I would want to hear as a fan. And just as a person that tells a lot of human interest stories and knows how to craft a human interest story, I let those instincts take over to help me ask the questions about his personal life. I hope that makes sense.
No,
You also have, though, because of various pandemic-related reasons, I do not have a hard copy of the book to show you. I read it, we read it online, but the layout of the book is extremely colorful, and I don't mean storytelling-wise, like literally, like here's 2 pages that are different fonts, different colors, and it'll be like, Manny Ramirez, tell us your best Bartolo Colón story. It has these nice pullouts.
Your best big sexy story.
One thing I especially appreciated was when he talks about food and there's just like a little picture of a steak at upper right. I feel like he would appreciate that.
But the one thing that comes through is, and we'll talk about, I think his career is underrated just as a pitcher. But before you get that, is also, though, that guy, like, lovable teammate, everyone seems. Can you tell us the story that before we get to the donkey story, the other story about when
I want to let people know the donkey story is coming.
It is coming. Yes. The donkey we will not leave without the donkey. But
I'll tease it by saying that I'm going to give some inside information, behind the scenes information about how that story came to be written.
Things you don't even know about.
The horny donkey is coming.
We can edit that.
Don't give away too much. Yeah, don't give too much.
Live. Nothing to worry about.
But tell the story real quick, which I thought was really emblematic of who the guy is, about when he's eating it on the Angels. He comes out, he just bombs the first inning, and what he does and kind of what it says about him. And Terry Collins just raves about the former Mets and Angels manager Terry Collins. Just raved about it. And I thought that story really kind of summed up, like, oh, this is who this guy is.
Totally. And, again, I'll tell you something just sort of from my perspective, was I actually remember watching that game.
But tell real quick what happened exactly.
Yeah, sure. So it's 2014. So it's his first year with the Mets. If I recall correctly, I want to say it was maybe his second ever start with the Mets. And they're on the road in Anaheim, of all places, which is where he played. And he gets torched. I believe he gives up 3 consecutive home runs in the first inning, and it's to Mike Trout, Albert Pujols, and Raul Ibanez.
I mean, just wasted.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, which nothing to be embarrassed about.
Lightweights.
Yeah, right. So he gives up those home runs, and then I think he gives up a couple more runs in like the second inning or something like that. I think it's like 7 runs total in like the first 2 innings, something like that. And he goes into the dugout and he tells Terry Collins, he goes, "Terry, don't worry, I'll get you through the 7th." And the reason why he said that was because he knew that the Mets bullpen was a little sort of shaky. They'd been used a lot the previous couple games. And as Terry Collins told me over the phone, which was quite a thrill, he said, you can't teach that. You can't teach that. And the definition of a professional, Bartolo's picture should be like right next to it. And he said, and what wound up happening was Bartolo, pitched into the 5th inning. But still, regardless, over the course of a year, and I believe I'm almost positive he pitched 200 innings for the Mets that year. And even just eating up innings, if you know anything about baseball, if you know the role of a starting pitcher, if nothing else, they need to eat up innings. I think I read an interview once with Tom Glavine where he said one thing you can't replace on a team is 200 innings out of a starting pitcher. He said that's like among the most important things to count, for a team's success, to count toward a team's success. But I actually remember watching that game. And at the time I was dating, I had a new girlfriend who I was getting into baseball. I was like getting her interested in baseball for the first time. And I was watching that game and he was getting just lit up and he stayed in. And I told my girlfriend at the time, I said, you see what this guy's doing? I said, he's taking his licks for the team. He's not coming out. He doesn't want to come out of this game because he wants to eat up innings. And I was totally right. And Terry Collins got to tell me that over my phone, which was really cool.
And now you're married.
Colón's
No,
incredible
that is
too.
Ancient history girlfriend.
He's like a type of Met. They've always had the Mets love to sign guys that are like 38 and over. Like no other team is quite as drawn to guys that are like roughly my age. Which is let's name some. Would you like to name some guys? I mean,
I'm trying to think of like David Bell, I guess, kind of comes to mind.
So the 2006-7 teams were all like the
Jose Valentin.
Yeah, so the last really good Mets team before 2015 was like El Duque was on the team, Jeff Conine, like Julio Franco was on it, who was like
Moises Alou.
Yeah, so the Mets have always been drawn to players in their 40s, which as a fetish you wouldn't judge it. As a team building move, you could take issue with some of it. Colón, as a guy that worked out for them, was very clearly like the sort of signing that the Mets do because he was available inexpensively, even coming off good seasons in Oakland. Because of the fact that he was old and no one knew how long.
I mean, he got $10 million. He got $10 million his first year and 12 his second.
Yeah,
so
but by
I would say mid-level.
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't. Like they paid him like they're paying like whatever. I guess Rick Porcello is getting more. We don't need to talk about Rick Porcello.
Yeah,
because I'll just get upset.
Yeah,
we can talk about other stuff. But that him, I think, as a Mets fan, like what makes him special to me, and you can answer this. Patrick's kind of like an honorary Mets fan, even though he is ethnically Phillies.
No.
Really?
No.
You care about the Sixers that much, and you are.
The Phillies thing never. The Phillies thing never clicked. I will cop to. I grew up an Orioles fan, and that went away years and years ago. But no, I'm not a from birth Mets fan. I will cop to that.
I think that what I was going to say though is part of what makes I think Bartolo special to Mets fans, and I think makes him special as a player who's had this extremely long career with the really interesting arc of kind of like coming back after the platelet therapy, that like he like has exceeded expectations for a decade after having been a star, a Cy Young Award winner and stuff like that. And that I think, the Mets can claim a lot of that. And yet I think every team that has dealt with Bartolo over the back half of his career got more from it than they thought they would. And there's something about like his career, I think, that is redemptive in that way, that like it's even if it doesn't necessarily end when he wants it to end or anything like that, it's a happy story, like that he got more than he expected.
And the thing about the book is that he's very sort of matter of fact. I wouldn't call him super introspective. On the other hand, he's pretty straightforward. Multiple times he talks about crying. He says, I screwed up with the steroids. He's sort of like, this is who I am. But what's interesting is, even the big sexy thing, you're like, oh, how'd you get the name? Noah Syndergaard called me it. And that's how it started. I
The way I wrote it in the book even was he was like, there's not much of a story there.
It just makes something up. But it's kind of like, it's
Right.
also there's not a lot of bullshit with him. I mean, he's a big dude who can pitch, and teammates like him. And what you're saying, what Dave is saying, like he isn't just a journeyman who's hung around. He isn't just kind of been padding stats. He went from sort of a phenom to 10 years of being a really reliable and 15 game winner, roughly. I mean, I know he had injuries.
Yeah, just an innings eater dude, but yeah. Do you think he feels like happy with the career that he got?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that what might even be a bigger, more important element of what he hopes his legacy would be that he was an excellent teammate. And, he actually did not pitch terribly well his last 2 seasons with the Rangers and in part-time with the Braves and the Twins. But I asked Dan Warthen. So Dan Warthen was his pitching coach in New York, but then also in Texas with the Rangers. And I said to Dan Warthen, I said, coming off that bad year with the Twins and Braves, I said, from what Warthen was telling me, which was that when he was with the Mets, he would like hold court with all the Latin players, standing around him. And, during spring training, the young Latin-born players, especially the pitchers, would like go with him for extra workouts, after the spring training games or what have you. And I said, what you're telling me, Mr. Warthen, is that, maybe when he signs with Texas after not having such a great year the year before, it's some of these intangibles and some of his ability to tutor and help young players. I'll bet that's probably what Texas was thinking when they signed him, huh? And Warthen, I think he said something to the effect of, yeah, you're probably right.
Because I don't the Hall of Fame stuff bores me to tears. But do you think, do both of you think, I think his career is a little underrated, underappreciated because of the sort of big sexy thing that came along when he was good. But I kind of think we've all forgotten how, he was a hammer in Cleveland. I did not stay up to watch enough Anaheim games, but I'm assuming similar.
I think if you look at his career and if you take out, or if you add in, I should say, maybe his career averages across, 3 years that he was injured. One of them, he was just out of the game completely. Then he pitched 1 year with Boston. I think he only made like 9 starts or something. The year before that, he only made like 12 starts or something with the Angels, due to injury, starting in 2006, I want to say. But anyway, if you add 2007, 8, and 9, and you give him another 45 wins, now you're looking at, he has 247, I believe is the number. So now you're looking at Mike Mussina type numbers. And Mike Mussina's in, and maybe his ERA is a little lower because he was a little bit, of a stronger pitcher, pitching to a lower ERA in those middle 3 years that he lost, than he was maybe later. So if he's not hurt, I think he's definitely in. But I as it stands now, I don't think he gets in. I personally don't think he gets in. Although if you ask me, I'm also a very tough judge. But I do think that, going back to David's question about, was Bartolo happy with his career? There's a point in the book where we discuss his 2004 season. So I believe, that was his first with the Angels. So he signs this massive free agent contract, comes over to the Angels. His first year, he has a 5.01 ERA. His ERA was at least over 5.01, 5.04, something like that. But he wins 18 games. So, he says, that I got a lot of crap in the media, and crap was the word he used when I was talking to him. And, that he signed this big contract and he wasn't worth it. And then, of course, he comes back the next year and he wins the Cy Young Award. But, he said, he's like, look, when you're pitching in the major leagues, I was on a good offensive team. I left some strikes over the middle of the plate to get guys out, and they wound up hitting them over the wall. But you know what? I wound up winning the game because I was already up 5-1. So if a guy hit, if a couple guys hit some solo home runs and I won 5-3, I didn't care. you know. And he's like, but if it was a 2-1 game, you know, maybe would have struck that guy out instead of letting him hit the ball out. And you heard stuff like that when Jack Morris was, you know, trying to get into the Hall, you know, which he eventually did because he has that 3.87 ERA or something like that. Bartolo's is a tick over 4, so, you know, it's going to be difficult for him. But I think the way Bartolo looks at it is like that ERA, it's a little misleading. You know, you got to think about the context.
I want to say, so I'm on the record as hating the Hall of Fame, so I will not answer this, but I will give this to you, Dave, because it is actually a Q&A question from Tad Schellenbach. I hope you said your name right. Bartolo has a career B-WAR of 47.8 over 21 years. As a fan and a sports writer, do you think he is a Hall of Famer?
It depends. Like the way that the Hall of Fame gets chosen now, no, you know, but I think that this is the type of career that tends to get underrated for all the reasons that Michael said.
Yes.
It just like contextualizing it is difficult, especially contextualizing it is difficult because, as we were saying, it covers like 3 distinct eras of Major League Baseball, like different styles of it, right? That like you start in the late 90s, that sort of like is very, very different than the offensive environment that the game was played in the last few years, especially. But I mean, like a lot of the stuff that needs to be sort of contextual, which is why a stat like B-WAR is good. It still can be very difficult to sort of like suss all that out and sort of put it together. But a guy that plays for this long and that has this impact on the game and that winds up, you know, sort of as an iconic figure, not just because he's like a big dude with silly hair, but because of the fact that he really was just there for the entirety of a generation of baseball. Like if Omar Vizquel gets in, then Bartolo should be considered for it too. Now, I personally like the way that the Hall of Fame is now. I don't think Omar Vizquel should get in either, but that like it's that level of like sustained, very good with like a peak of excellence that I think Bartolo's was well higher than Vizquel's ever was. Like I don't have a problem with that, but like, you know, for me, the Hall of Fame itself is the least interesting part of that, you know, whole experience. That like, if you go to Cooperstown and all you do is look at the plaques, then you blew it, you know, like
It's a bunch of Han Solo frozen in ice carbon things with
Yeah.
like bad faces. That part sucks. Go to the museum. The museum's fine. I mean, we didn't need all the mitts from the last 50 years, but a few mitts, representative mitts.
And that's, I think that's like what I would say about Bartolo is like the museum is the cool part. He definitely has a place in that, like multiple places in that. And I think that like, so if he doesn't get a plaque, he doesn't get a plaque. But
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more topics before we do a little Q&A.
All right.
So since we're going to go to the clip second, let's do first. Let's hear the story about Pancho the horny donkey.
Oh, is there
All
a
right.
horny donkey in this book? I hadn't heard about the horny donkey.
So I'll do a second reading. This will be quicker. By the time I was about 8 or 9 years old. Oh, and just because since I'm the only one apparently
That has a physical copy.
that has the book, I can't leave this up to you guys. This is the book.
It's a PDF. It's a very handy. It's a
Yeah.
portable data file.
By the time I was about 8 or 9 years old, I was helping him pick avocado, him being his father, coffee beans, and cacao off the trees in his field. I worked with him almost every single day during the week. I would go to school from 8 a.m. until noon. I wasn't much of a student, to be honest. I liked helping my father. Not only did I pick fruit from the trees, I also used this machine he had that took the pulp casings off the coffee beans. To make it work, you put the coffee fruit into a pit and turned a lever. Over and over and over and around and around and around, over and over again. The coffee beans with their fruit stripped off would fall out of the bottom into a sack. I had to carry many heavy sacks of coffee beans and other fruits and vegetables from the field, up hills and down hills to my house and to my dad's store. To help me with my many chores, when I was about 13 or 14 years old, my father bought me a special gift, one that I treasure to this day, even though he is no longer with us, my very own pet donkey, Pancho. Pancho was a good donkey. Pancho meant so much to me because it was my father who gave him to me. I would strap heavy sacks of fruit and coffee beans on Pancho's back and walk him from the fields to the store and my house. One time, I loaded him up with 20 bags of coffee, which weighed 200 pounds. When I would pull down avocados, I would load him up with 200 of them. Sometimes I would ride on Pancho's back, but even then that was for work, when Pancho had to drag a heavy load. One day, around 5 years after my father gave him to me, Pancho was walking along a 4-lane road and saw a female donkey on the other side of it. Pancho ran after her, hard. And when I say hard, I don't mean fast. As he chased after the female donkey, as he chased after the female donkey, a car slammed into Pancho and killed him. When that happened, I cried a lot.
And then he references the donkey again later at some point in the book. I remember there's a callback.
Yeah.
Really love that donkey. So what is...
It doesn't seem like he's especially forthcoming on a lot of things, and yet it seems like he got a lot of great donkey material. It was very, very deeply felt.
Well, so I was aware of Pancho because I think whoever it was that wrote the profile of him in the New York Times did mention Pancho the donkey, and it was sort of a well-known thing. As a matter of fact, in the video of the 9th inning of that game in '98 against the Yankees, some Indian fans had a poster that said Pancho Power. So it was, widely known that he had this pet donkey when he was a kid. So anyway, so I asked him about Pancho, and he tells me the story. But as we were going back and forth, he gets to the part where Pancho is like walking, running across the highway. So he goes like this, and he starts laughing, and he goes, and he was hard. Like that. That's how he did it. And I was driving back from his house in New Jersey, and I was just thinking, I was like, how the hell am I going to write that? Yeah. And that's what I came up with.
Because the book is like, it's about a baseball player. It's the sort of thing that kids might want to read. And yet his beloved work pet died in a tragic boner accident. There's no other way to describe it. Really well done. It's so
T-boned he was T-boned for love.
I wish you'd said it differently, but you're 100% correct in doing it. So,
he seemed so. The funny thing is, it seemed so. He's so sincere. Well, it seemed like he was really, really loved that donkey.
Yeah. It seems like he was very much in earnest about a lot of stuff in the book. Like that seems like you got some real, even about his anxiety, about his drinking, about a lot of this, about his personal shortcomings in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect, because he really has run away from giving quotes for his entire career.
I did want to ask that. Actually, can I ask you real quick about that? Because he does say that he had a drinking problem that affected his liver, and then that's the end of it. Like, did you get more? Did he feel was he hospitalized or just?
No, I'll be honest with you. Everything that's in the book was like everything that I got from him. I mean, I'll be honest. I put everything that I got from him in the book, and I think once or twice. Once when I was in New Jersey and I was leaving that last day, and then once when I was leaving the Dominican Republic my last day. I said to him at the end of the interviews those days, I said, all right, is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you want in the book? And he said no. But as a matter of fact, so the drinking, he had a drinking problem that nobody that I know of that was aware of in terms of fans, that he just brought up himself. When I didn't know to ask him. I had no idea. And he just mentioned it because when he got to the Yankees, it was Mariano Rivera that really helped him with that. And, which is a great story. One of my favorites in the book.
Yeah.
And then also, as a matter of fact, he's very forthcoming about his steroid issue. And, he, again, brought that up to me. I knew that he had, tested positive for testosterone, and I knew that he was suspended. But when it came up in conversation, actually came up just sort of organically, and he brought it up. What happened was I was looking at his baseball reference in his company. I was looking at his baseball reference, his postseason stats, and I had seen that he pitched one postseason for the A's, but not the other, and he was with the A's for 2 years. And I said, wait a minute, I thought the A's made the playoffs both years. I said, how come you didn't pitch in the other year? And he goes, oh, because I had that problem. I said, what problem? He goes, the steroids. I said, oh. I go, do you want to talk about that? He goes, yeah. So I said, okay. So, we talked about that. And I said to him, after we mentioned that after we discussed that, I said, I think it's really important that you were this honest about the steroids, because now people will believe, any other section, of the book will seem more sort of trustworthy. So he said he understood, and he thanked me for noticing that.
The two families thing, though, that was off the table.
I did not ask him, and he didn't bring it up.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
We actually don't have that many questions, so let's talk about this before we show the clip. Greatest Major League Baseball home run? I mean, is there any one better than this? I guess Joe Carter, maybe Bobby Thompson.
But yeah, I think there's got to be better home runs. Just about the Kirk Gibson, especially in terms of just meanful and impact on the game. But well, I did do another podcast, and the host, I think it was Metzmerized. I think it was him. He said, someone recently pointed out to me, he said, this might be the greatest pitcher home run ever. And I was like, I hadn't even thought about that. And I know there have been pitcher home runs, but I can't think of a bigger, more famous, more impressive pitcher home run ever than this one.
I'll add this to that. I think the Mets have the two most improbable and therefore best pitcher offensive plate appearances of any organization.
Are you going to say Jeremy Hefner?
I was going to say Dae-Sung Koo hitting a triple off Randy Johnson.
One, yeah.
Or double, I guess.
Right.
And then scoring from second with a weighted ball in his pocket and damaging his body in the process.
I remember watching that game, and I was at the game that Jeremy Hefner, who I believe only has one hit, and it was a home run off Joe Blanton of the Phillies. And I was at that game, and I was actually in the first row stands, first base side, field level stance, and I was giving it to Blanton so hard, even before that. And I remember when he gave up the home run, because I just kept yelling, I was like, Blanton, you suck. I just kept saying that so many times. People started cracking up. When he gave up that home run, people just started looking at me like, you gonna say it, dude? And I screamed.
Say the line. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So with Bartolo, it's I think, again, if we're not going to do that many questions, I think it's worth contextualizing. Patrick, I know that you got to see Bartolo hit in person as well. I saw him at a game that I went to with my friend Charles Starr, who's a Pirates fan, would organize whenever the Pirates were in town, go with him and a bunch of other degenerate pirate weirdos to watch them play the Mets. The experience of a live Bartolo Colón at bat, which, I think it's fair to say whether he makes it back or not, just given the sort of movement towards the universal DH, we've seen our last one. There is no live performance, with the exception of I guess Cat Power when she was drinking too much, that it really was
there's the reference we were looking for.
As uncanny and as weird an experience. When I saw Bartolo hit against the Pirates, he grounded out, carried the bat with him in his right hand all the way down the line. He did not ever discard the bat before being thrown out. This was
like Pedro Serrano in Major League.
Yeah, but it was that wasn't even weird.
I saw him try to bunt once.
Oh boy!
And did you?
The joy at his failure. Nobody was happier to be terrible at something than he was.
Yeah, and yet it was clear that the home run meant a lot to him too.
Before we run the clip, one pitcher in Major League Baseball with a grand slam in the World Series, Dave McNally, Baltimore Orioles, pride of Billings, Montana. Anytime we can work in Billings.
I didn't know he was from there. That's got a great career for that guy.
Dave McNally and Jeff Ballard, the only two Billings, Montana Major League Baseball players, I believe. Yeah. Jess, would you please roll the clip? If not the best home run, maybe the best Gary Cohn call for sure.
That beautiful Bart footage.
All right, here we go.
Colón looking for his first hit of the year. He drives one deep left field. That goes Upton. Back near the wall. It's out of here. Bartolo has done it. The impossible has happened. The team vacates the dugout as Bartolo takes the long trot. His first career home run. And there will be nobody in the dugout to greet him. This is one of the great moments in the history of baseball. Bartolo Colón has gone deep.
I want to say that was one of the longest home run trots I've ever seen, but I think that's how fast he runs.
And now they'll flood up the tunnel and give him his just due. His 226th career at bat. You knew if he ever made contact in just the right way, he was strong enough to do it. And now Bartolo has brought down the house.
So good.
It never gets old. It really doesn't. And the thing that I love the most about that call. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. The thing that I love most about that call is when he makes contact, you hear Ron Darling go, "Oh," like that. And the reason why I love that so much is because it points to how exciting it was and how excited he personally was. Because for people that don't sort of know that, like, the color commentator is not ever supposed to step on the play-by-play guy in broadcasting. So, his job is to remain silent, and you kind of hear him like he just wants to like lose his mind like everybody else.
But he squeals.
And he goes, "Oh." yeah. But he's got you. So you hear him like trying to like abide by those broadcasting rules, but also like sort of, lets a little bit out. And it's just, I just love that.
Same for Gary Cohen, who's like, I've heard him call walk-offs at like 1/3 of that energy level. Yeah. And like, that's his signature call. He's a professional. Like, he knows what he's doing. That's the second inning of a dumb game against like end stage Jamie Shields and the Padres. And he was out of his mind. It's just fantastic.
It was. I don't even think he was that fired up for the no-hitter.
Yeah, he was like, "Oh, very nice, okay," but he's probably gonna get hurt. Whereas in this case, it's like really something different.
It's so ridiculous.
Good. Send him to the trainers. That'll work out fine.
We actually have some questions from the viewers now, which is cool. Not that we couldn't continue talking about this, but we should probably read them.
All right, I will read the first one. I don't even know what this is, but from Daniel Sargent.
Don't read the Steely Dan question. Just thank you.
All right. My friend
I hate Steely Dan.
Well, his question was, does Bartolo like their album, The Caves of Altamira? I don't think you need to answer that. Although it does have some connection to him because, Altamira.
I didn't ask him about his second family, and I didn't ask him any Steely Dan questions. Okay.
That's professionalism.
I think this is my friend Adrian, who's leaving Brooklyn. Goodbye, Adrian. What amount of credit should the Yankees get in picking up Bartolo off the scrap heap when his career seemed to be over after quite a few bad years? To what extent should Mets be thanking the Yankees for rediscovering Colón and bringing him back to the baseball world?
Actually, quite a bit. So he's out of baseball for a year, and I get into a lot more details in the book, obviously, about this, or we, I guess, as co-authors. But anyway, he's out of baseball for a year, and I don't think people realize that he was out of baseball for a year not only due to injury, but he was also out of baseball because he had an unspeakable personal family tragedy befall him. His brother-in-law was murdered while he was trying to recover, and he was in this incredibly deep, dark depression, and he really wasn't even thinking about coming back for a while. And thank goodness he did, because he had that whole second half. But no, he, his family and his friends were trying to like coax him and tell him to kind of get back into baseball, and he started training again, and he started pitching, if I recall correctly, with some Dominican League teams. And Tony Pena, who was coaching for the Yankees at the time, happened to see him pitch, and Tony Pena said, "Bartolo, you look good. I'm going to call the Yankees. I think they could use you." And Bartolo said, "Okay." And they took him back, and he came back into the major leagues, pitched well. He first started out of the bullpen, but then he was a full-time fifth starter. I think he pitched to like a 3.87 ERA over like 24 starts or something like that, which is good for the American League, obviously, certainly as a fifth starter. And what winds up happening then is the Yankees don't need him the following season. So Bartolo couldn't confirm if this was Brian Cashman or not. He wasn't sure, but he did say that somebody from the Yankees front office called the Oakland Athletics, called Billy Beane, the general manager, and said, listen, we love Bartolo. We don't have a place for him next season on our roster. You should think about signing him because he'll be good for your young players, right? Billy Beane signs him. They do the 2 years. He actually has the steroid suspension under Billy Beane, but Bartolo apologized and Billy Beane was okay with it. 2 years with Oakland. There's no place for Bartolo on the Oakland squad the next year. Billy Beane calls Sandy Alderson, the general manager of the Mets, and they have a long relationship. And he says, we don't have a place for Bartolo on our team. We think he'd be great for you. You should look at him. And if nothing else, he'd be great with your younger ball players. So, I mean, I just love that story. I'm glad the question was asked because I got the chance to tell it. And it's, it really speaks to the kind of person that he is, but also just like the kinds of people that, you do have in Major League Baseball. It is kind of this, relatively small fraternity. Everyone kind of knows each other. And everybody that I spoke to across organizations, Anaheim, Oakland, the Mets, going on and on, everybody said Bartolo's like one of my all-time favorite, players, one of my all-time favorite people that we've ever dealt with in Major League Baseball. It's great.
That's great. I'll read the last question, I guess, because we are getting down to the wire here. This is again from Tad Schellenbach, who asked an earlier one. Do you have a favorite non-playing Bartolo moment? Mine has to be the Kingsford commercial, which is indeed amazing. Also, I'm sad that the only time I saw him play in person was Mets, Mariners, and Seattle, so I didn't get to see him bat. But there's a lot of away from the game stuff with Bartolo that I personally like. There's these images of him showing up at Mets spring training, like with his boys, or like videos of him training in the off season, doing like just crazy weird at home workouts.
Like jugs of stuff, right? Like jugs of milk,
like
or
real
something.
like sort of the sort of exercise that people are doing in quarantine. That was like Bartolo's method, like well before
He had the hair.
Yeah, but he was he always had quarantine hair, but he has he's famously like a super duper hardworking guy, despite the fact that he's an unusually shaped athlete.
Yeah.
That he's famously
pumpkin shaped for Major League Baseball players is unusual.
It's more unusual now than it was when I was a kid. That there was definitely I feel like
true.
there was every team was issued a Rich Garces every spring, and they were just like, well, be careful with him. But
Rich Garces, wow,
it's a legend. So, but what of the non-playing stuff did you think in the book that was really delightful to you?
I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. For me, to answer that question, it is an absolute no-brainer. It's the story that his father told, which actually wraps the book up. And to be honest with you, I would say that hearing that story, not only is it a great story, and I'll tell the story in a moment, but it actually, I would say, was actually the most number one moment just for my writing career. And I guess I'll explain that after I tell the story. But so, I had interviewed Bartolo a couple days. This is down in the Dominican Republic. And Bartolo sends one of his friends and one of his agents with me out to his father's house. Bartolo is not with me. So the three of us are driving over to Bartolo's father's estate. And we go and, we sit down, and Bartolo's father speaks to me through his agent, is also bilingual. So the story Bartolo's father tells me, he says, I said to him, I said, what's the one story of Bartolo that you think of that really kind of defines who he is, to you? So he says, anytime anybody asks me that, I always tell the same story. He said, I think Bartolo was, maybe about 11 or 12 years old, something like that. And, he was working for me in my fields. And one day I go to wake him up and I say, Bartolo, come on, it's time to knock down some cacao. And Bartolo's like, no, I'm too tired. I don't want to go. I don't want to help. And his father's like, come on, you have to come. No matter what his father did, he couldn't get him to go out and help do some work in the fields. So his father goes out, he gets, I think, a little ladder, he goes up next to this cacao tree and he starts trying to grab some cacao. And he's trying to pull one cacao off the tree, and it's resistant. So he rips it down really hard, and the branch like ricochets back into his eye, and it like cuts his eye. He falls off his like little ladder, and his eye is like puffing up, and he's like cursing God. He's like, why did you send me such lazy children? He's like, why do you do this to me? And I always have to work so hard. My children don't want to help me. God damn you. And he like opens his eye at one point, and he sees Bartolo like standing over him, and he goes, and Bartolo's dad says to me, he says, Bartolo, you're here now. He's like, yeah, I thought you didn't want to come. You didn't want to come. You don't want to help your poor father. Now look at me. Look what happened. So Bartolo stands over him, and he goes, don't worry, Dad. With this arm, I'm going to make you so rich you'll never have to work again. So
Flex.
he tells me, yeah, literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah.
So he tells me that story. The father tells me that story. And myself, the guy that was interpreting, Bartolo's agent, and Bartolo's friend, we get up and we start walking to the car that we came in. And I literally can't move. Like it just was so stirring and emotional the way I know it's a funny sounding story, but just take my word for it. The way he told it was just really, just like I said, very stirring. And in that moment, it all just kind of hit me like, oh my God, like Bartolo, his family, his friends, his representatives, everyone is sort of in his like very tight, close-knit, loving network. They're all trusting me to tell this story. They've empowered me to tell this story on not just Bartolo's behalf, but everyone's behalf. And I just was I didn't feel pressure. I felt so humbled and so honored that I was overcome with emotion, and I literally couldn't walk. I started walking and I stopped and I bent over, and his agent like said to me, he's like, hey, are you okay? I go, yeah. And I pick myself up. I start walking. I walk like 2 steps. I stop. And he goes, dude, seriously, like, are you okay? What's wrong? I said, look, I'm sorry. I said, I'm just being weird. He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, just that story, it just was really emotional for me to hear. I said, I taught high school English for 11 years. I didn't know that I'd be doing something like this. And now you and Bartolo and everybody, you're all trusting me with this story. It just means so much to me. Thank you. I said, I'm sorry if that's weird, but I can't help myself. So he goes, no, are you kidding? He goes, look, and he points to his arm, and he's got goosebumps down his whole arm. Story, right? So I'm like, oh, okay. And then the guy, the other guy, Bartolo's friend, who did not speak English, comes back around the car, and he says to his agent in Spanish, hey, is this guy okay? And the agent says back to him in Spanish, yeah, he's just emotional from the story, So the guy goes, hey, look, and he points to his arm, and he's got goosebumps down his arm. I swear to God, I'm not exaggerating at all. And it just,
I mean, you can't really.
Number one story. I'm actually getting a little emotional now just retelling it. It's just it just meant so much to me.
You have the first walk-off Squawkin Sports ending, I think.
Yeah, nice.
You have the. We have to wrap up. We're coming. It's like there's 2 things I need to do. My daughter pointed out I forgot to hold up the official Squawkin Sports logo last episode, so there it is.
Yeah,
Squawkin
that's the original.
So your daughter gets to walk. Your daughter gets to walk off. Come on.
And we have a little bit longer break this time, but July 16th we have David Hill, whose new book is The Vapors, which is basically a history filtered also through his family of Hot Springs, Arkansas, which was way cooler than Vegas, with the gambling and the boozing and the mafia and the whole nine. It's an excellent book, and you have more time to read it, July 16th. I want to thank Dave, as usual, and Michael. This was a lot of fun. I hope we get to see you again.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, man.
That's my dad. Hi, Dad.
Hey, Dad.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Michael. That was a hell of a story. That's a great way to end. We appreciate having you, and thanks, Patrick and David, for hosting as always. The buy link for the book is in the chat. You can find it at greenlightbookstore.com. So thanks for supporting the author in the store, and have a great night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Barto.